In our lesson for May 8th, we come to another of the pivotal chapters in the book of Acts. Acts 2, as I pointed out earlier, is certainly one of them. The coming of the Holy Spirit, Pentecost, everything that kind of evolves from that. This second pivotal passage is Acts chapter 9. And it's pivotal because in it we see the story of the conversion of Paul, who became the most prominent member of the early church, who will be the dominant character now through the remainder of the book of Acts. And therefore his conversion is important for us to understand. The problem with this, however, is that his conversion is so dramatic that sometimes it confuses us about what conversion really involves. There are those who almost suggest that you have to have a conversion like the Apostle Paul in order to be truly converted. But this is not true, has not been true across the ages, and is not true today. Conversions happen in every different way, sometimes dramatic, sometimes over a long period of time, sometimes just a simple step from this point to becoming a believer. Sometimes it is a dramatic change like we see in the Apostle Paul. But we need to try to balance understanding how significant his conversion experience was with not using that as the model for all conversion experiences. I wanted to say that as we got into the lesson. So let's look at it. And of course you notice as we begin, it doesn't say Paul, it says Saul. This is his name to begin with. It will be changed to Paul later. So we're going to refer to him in this lesson as Saul. But if I slip going through and don't notice it and say Paul, you'll understand who I'm talking about. So who was Saul? In the opening verse of our text, in Acts chapter 9, verse 1, we get a hint. It says, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. That phrase tells us a couple of things about Paul. It tells us about his passion to begin with. He was these murderous threats that he was breathing out. I mean, we got somebody, if you can picture somebody who's in the cartoons where they have smoke coming out of their ears, you know, they're so mad, so passionate, so on fire. This is a picture of the Apostle Paul. But we also see the persistence of it with that little word, still. In other words, he's been doing this for a while and he's still doing it. It's not something he did once, not something he does every once in a while. It's something that he continues to do with that same kind of passion. So we see a passionate, persistent opponent to the gospel and to the new movement that Jesus Christ has started. Now, Luke decides that he wants to spread his anti-Christian, proactive approach to destroying Christianity by going to Damascus. Apparently, he learns that there's a pocket of Christians up in Damascus who are trying to hide away from him. And so he gets some letters giving him the authority to go to Damascus, and his intention is to go to Damascus and arrest the Christians. He says in verse 2, asking for letters to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found anyone there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners back to Jerusalem. So this guy is a proactive opponent of Christianity on his way to Damascus to carry out his commitment. So who is this Saul introduced to us in our text? Quick profile on your outline. Number one, he was born in Tarsus. We'll learn that in other places. A university town where the intellectual atmosphere was colored by Greek thought. So Saul of Tarsus. He was educated at Jerusalem in the school of Gamaliel. Remember, we talked about him in an earlier lesson. One of the leaders of one of the groups of the Jewish religious setting in Jerusalem at that time. He was taught by him, Acts chapter 22, verse 3. Saul was also a Roman citizen. And he's going to, that will provide him certain privileges that he will call on a later occasion in Acts 16 when he is flogged by the Philippians, the Philippian jailer, and he's a Roman citizen. He's not supposed to be flogged, so that's going to create some tension there. And he gives us his own description of who he is. If you look up Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, 6, 5 and 6, there are three phrases. He says, in regard to the law, I'm a Pharisee. In other words, I'm committed to fulfilling the law to its completion. As for zeal, persecuting the church. In other words, he testifies to his passionate opposition to what Jesus is doing. And thirdly, for legalistic righteousness, faultless. In other words, Paul says that I follow the law to its last degree. And because of that now, he is on his way to Damascus to arrest Christians and bring them back to Jerusalem. Two meetings now are going to change his life. One meeting